Hey, I'm Sue Daley from Sue Daley Designs, and I'm here today to introduce you to my Chelsea quilt. The Chelsea quilt, which is hanging behind me, is made with 30s fabrics, and 30s fabrics are one of those fun fabrics that are always around, but they just fluctuate with popularity, and right at this moment they're trending heavily right across the world. I want to talk to you just a little bit about the bias strip, how to do that, a little bit about putting the Dresdens together, and how I've actually put the quilt together in as a whole. So I hope you can sit back and relax and enjoy what I've got to bring to you today. Okay, let's get started. So this quilt measures 68 inches by 68 inches, so it's a square quilt and it has a scalloped edge on it. So we have the pattern here, and inside your pattern you have some design sheets. So the design sheets are where we're going to trace out our center applique piece. So first of all, you're going to cut a square 22 inches of your background fabric, and then you're going to fold it in half and into quarters and iron it so that we get our quarter marks on here so we can center up our applique design. You're going to lay your fabric over the top of your design sheet, and sometimes it's good to tape it down onto the table so it doesn't move. And so just lay it over the top so that you're centering up your design. So you can line up the center with your dotted line here through on your design sheet. So once you have your fabric laid out over your design sheet, I would take a pencil, a fabric pencil, and my favorite is the Soline Trio pencil, and my favorite colors to use in that are pink or green, and I use different, and white of course, but it just depends on what color the fabric is that you're drawing onto. So you're just going to trace around where the bias edge is going to be. I don't trace on here, I don't trace all my leaves and flowers out onto my background fabric because I just place them. However, with a bias strip, I need an edge to be able to sew to when I'm putting my bias strip on. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to make a bias strip, the simple way of doing that using a bias maker. And this one, we're going to be using a 1/4 inch bias maker. So it is a 1/4 inch, so your bias will be 1/4 inch wide. And this will make a really flat bias for you. Okay, so right now I'm going to show you how to use a 1/4 inch bias maker. So a 1/4 inch bias maker will make a 1/4 inch finished bias strip. So you need to, when you're choosing your fabric for your bias, you need to make sure it's big enough so you can cut it on the bias. So I have a piece of fabric here, this is the length, this is the width, and that is of course the bias. So that's a 45-degree angle. And so for a 1/4 inch bias strip, you need to cut a 1/2 inch strip of fabric on the bias. So just pop your ruler on there and cut it up, and then you have your 1/2 inch piece. Now, to use the bias maker is really simple. What we're going to do, I'll just move this over here a little bit, is we're going to feed the fabric into our bias maker, and I have it so the wrong side is facing up inside, and I'm going to pull that end out a little bit, and I'm just going to use one pin and I'm going to just fix it to my ironing surface just to hold it in place. Okay, now this is a time when I would use an ironing aid. So what I've got here is Flatter. I love Flatter, it smells great, it's easy to use, and it's a smooth operator. So we're just going to take our iron and I run it. I'm pulling back in my left hand, I'm just pulling that bias maker back and I'm pushing my iron at the front of it, so just moving it along so that once it's out, and there you have it already done. So what you have is the flattest piece of bias that you'll ever find. It is even all the way along. It's great, it's unbelievable, and the Flatter will help to keep the fold, because sometimes when you make bias like this, if you leave it for any length of time, it might open up. So the Flatter will help it stay folded and nice and neat, ready for you to use on your next piece of work. So we're going to go and I'm going to show you how to apply this onto your background, and the little tips and techniques of how to sew this. You know, sewing on your inside curves rather than your outside, sewing on your inside curves first rather than your outside curves first. So we'll move over there and I'll show you how to pop that onto your background. Okay, so how do we put bias onto a background fabric? Now there's a couple of little tricks that'll make it much easier for you to work with, and it'll make the finished item look a lot more professional as well. So on your layout diagram, on your design sheet, you will have all your applique pieces, and you'll see some of them are numbered, and that's the order of how you put these down. So you need to go number 1, 2, 3, 4. With your bias strips, you'll see that some of these go in underneath others. So you have to make sure that those are the ones you place first. So you wouldn't put these ones going up the center first. You would put these ones coming in off the side first, because this end here goes in underneath that stem there. Now, another thing that is really, really important when you're doing these bias strips is when I go to sew this, and I'll explain it, but it's much easier for me to explain right now, is that when you're sewing bias strip and when you're sewing curves like this, and if I turn this around here, if I was to be sewing this piece on here, I would be sewing my inside curve first. And then I come out and I sew my inside curve. So I sew my inside edge, then I travel across underneath my stem, and then I sew the inside edge, I travel across under the stem, I sew my inside edge. Because if you start with this outside edge here, what happens is when you go to sew that inside edge, you'll get it, it'll be all gathered up and it won't sit nice and flat. So it's crucial that you sew the inside edge first every time. So I would sew around in there, I'd run my thread underneath, sew the inside edge of this one, and then run my thread under inside edge of that one. So I'm going to, now I'm just going to show you how I'm going to sew that on there. I don't use any, I don't pin it down, and I don't use any glue to baste it down either, simply because when you have a bias edge, like this, it's stretchy because it's on the bias. And if you glue it and pin it, as you're coming around, you're going to have to keep unpulling it and working it around because it's going to stretch. So we can put it on nice and flat without actually doing any basting down at all. Okay, so I'll just get rid of the design sheet. Okay, so I'm going to start, as I said, I'm going to start over here with one of these little offshoot stems. And so I've marked it on here. So what I'm going to do is take my needle and thread. So I usually use, if you're working with a cotton thread, you would need to match your thread to the green in this fabric here. If you're using a bottom line thread, it's not so crucial to match your thread exactly. So you can use, I'm just using an ecru here, or you can use the green. But if it's cotton, match it exactly or go one shade darker. Don't ever go lighter in your thread if you're working with a cotton thread. Okay, so I'm going to I've got a knot in the end of my thread. I'm going to just lose my knot into my bias strip here on where the fold is. And then I'm going to scrunch all this up in my hand because I am a scruncher when I sew. And I'm going to place it down, and I'm going to run the edge, this edge along. So I'm going to be working on the inside curve, and I'm going to run the inside curved edge along my drawn line. And it's going to be really hard for you to see that, but have a bit of faith because it is there. Okay, so I'm going to line that up right on the edge. Now with applique, and I've done YouTube tutorials before on needle turn applique, so it's the same technique as your needle turn applique, except that the edges already turn under, so you're not having to turn the edge under with your needle, but it's the same technique where you're going straight down into the white fabric, taking about an eighth of an inch stitch and coming up into the green. So the key is not to do what I just did and wrap it around the end, but the key is to go straight down into the white. So you're going, the thread's coming out of the green and then straight down into the white and coming up on an angle, just taking a small bite of fabric on the edge of your bias strip. Now my bias strip, I'm just working it so that it's sitting on the edge of my drawn line there. So I don't need to baste it down, because if I baste it, it's going to stretch and I'm going to have to unbaste it. And, you know, I'm not one for undoing things if I don't have to. So you're just going to sew along that edge, okay? And then when you get to the very end of it, so if I lay that out flat, that will sit around like that here. And then I'd cut this off where I need it to be. I'd run my thread underneath, and then I would sew back around the outside curved edge. So see how that will sit nice and flat? If I sew the outside edge first, then all inside of here will gather up and pucker up, and it will not be nice and flat like we want it to be. So this will be really nice and neat and just sit beautifully. Okay, so that's how we make a bias strip, and then you would just sew that on there first, and then you would come back and do all the other pieces over the top as in the order that they need to be done. Okay, so once you get your bias strips all sewn down, then you would move forward and do the rest of your applique, so your little tulip flowers, your other flowers, your leaves, and place all them on in the order that they're numbered on the sheet. So that would be the centre block covered there. The next thing we're going to do is move out to the Dresden plate. So I'm going to show you how I put those together and how to do the little Suffolk puff that I've sewn in the middle of it. So we'll be right back, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to work with is the little Dresden plate. So this is a 2-inch pointed Dresden, and there's 12 pieces in the little plate here. Okay, so first of all, we get some fabric, and we're going to cut out our the blades for the Dresden, so these little pieces here, using our template. Our template has a 1/4 inch seam allowance already on it, so just layer up your fabric, as many as you need, or as many as you can cut through with your blade that you have. If it's a sharp blade, you can cut through many at a time. So just working on your fabric, just spinning your board as you go. And there we have 2 little blades right there. Okay, then we're going to go and we're going to glue these little pieces. So I'll take my glue pen. We're going to put our paper. Now remember, our paper has a silk coating on it, so it works beautifully with the glue pen. So we're just going to run the glue along the edge, but away, so along down one side, but away from the edge just a little bit. We don't want to glue up all the very edge of it, because it's really hard to get your needle through if you glue on the fabric and into that little piece there. So just on the card, but away from the edge slightly. Just work around until you've done 4 of the 5 sides, so the 5th side being the bottom. So you don't want to, with this paper here, you don't want to fold your edge over on that bottom edge there. So you can see what I've done there. I've just have a raw edge here, so you want to leave those all sticking out. I'll just do another one for you. So pop your paper on to your fabric, run your glue along the edge, keep it in from the edge slightly. And remember, not too much glue, less is more. You don't want to struggle having to pull the papers out at the end of it. Fold it over. And you know, English piecing is so forgiving that if your seam allowance is bigger on one side than the other, it absolutely makes no difference to your work, because the perfection is in the card. So now that we've got a couple of those glued, I'm going to show you how to sew those together. So remember, we didn't turn the bottom edge over, we're just turning over the 4 sides and not the 5th one. So take your needle. I use the Milliner's 11 or a Milliner's 15. It's a Sue Daley brand. And I use a bottom line thread. It's a polyester thread. It's really fine, so the finer your needle and the finer your thread is, the better your work's going to be. If you use a big fat needle, you'll have big fat stitches. I pop a knot in the end of my thread, just a normal knot. It doesn't matter whether it's you tie it, it's that lick and twist that your grandma taught you, or it's a quilter's knot that you put in there, but just some sort of a knot in the end of your thread. So it's going to stabilise it in your fabric, in your work as you're sewing. So I'm going to now just put 2 blades together, right sides together, and I'm going to put my needle in between the fabric and the card, just so I can lose my knot in my work. It just holds it in there. We're going to take a stitch, 1 stitch, and I'm going to come in for a 2nd stitch, and I'm going to do the knicker knot, the famous knicker knot. So we have a thread at the front and 2 threads at the back here. Leave your needle in your work. The thread at the front's coming under, take it to the back, and it's going to come under and take it to the back. So the first thread's going to the left, the 2nd threads are going to the right. I'll do that one more time just so that you can see that again. So our thread at the front is going under to the left, take it to the back. These are coming under to the right, take them to the back. All right, we're going to travel down that side and sew these 2 pieces together. So taking about 2 threads of fabric each side. So you want to go, don't just pick up 1 thread of fabric, because otherwise it pulls it out of the fabric. So you need to pick up about 2 threads on each side. And working at about 1.5 millimeters apart, or 1/16 of an inch. So your stitches need to be that far apart. You don't need to do them on top of each other. It's absolutely not necessary to do them right on top of each other. And we're just going to move down the side here. So when you open up your work, because I've used a fine needle and fine thread, you're not seeing any stitches on the right side. Okay, so we're going to work around there and add. So we're going to make a Dresden plate using 12 of these little pieces, and that's how I ended up with this one. So I have 12 pieces going around, and they're all sewn just in the middle. And you can see into the center there that we have a raw edge right there in the middle. Now what I've done with mine on the Chelsea quilt is that I've put a Suffolk puff over the top of that. So I'm going to just step you through how I made the Suffolk puffs to go into the middle. Now these are very easy to make. We're going to take a circle of fabric, so you'll find the pattern for the circle inside your pattern, and we're going to take some thread, and I will use a normal cotton thread for this, or even a quilter's thread, like a quilting thread that's a little thicker, and I double it up and I tie a knot in the end of it. So I just popped a quilter's knot in there. So what we're going to do is turn that edge over, probably a little more than 1/8 of an inch, but not really 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to turn that over like that and work all the way around. So I'm just going to lose my knot into that seam there, and then we're going to work around. And I'm going to work with a fairly big running stitch, so my stitches are about 1/4 of an inch apart. Now the reason I do that is because if you want a small hole in the middle of your Suffolk puff, you do a bigger stitch. If you want a big hole in your in the center of your Suffolk puff, you'll do a really small stitch. So remember that bigger the stitch, smaller the hole. Smaller the stitch, bigger the hole, so it's opposite. You would think it was the other way around, but it isn't. And you want a nice close hole in the middle of your Suffolk puff. You don't want a big gaping hole in there, because you're only going to see the reverse side of the fabric if the hole's too big. So just working around that edge, and I work close to the edge, so close to that fold as I'm turning it under. You don't have to be particularly neat, because it's all just going to work its way out. It'll just look neat anyway. So you can be a little bit rough with that. Quick and easy is the key here. Almost to the end. Okay, last stitch, I'm going to bring that up. And as I pull that thread through, I'm going to pull that all the way up nice and tight. So what I end up with is this little circle with a gathered center, and you can see how when I pull that nice and tight, how the hole in the middle of my Suffolk puff is very small, and that's because I did those big stitches. If I'd have done really small stitches, then that hole in the middle there would have been substantially bigger than what it is now. So I want it nice and tight. So you need to be mindful when you're finishing this off and sewing the end of your thread off, that you sew it off, secure it really tightly, because for some reason they love to come undone, these little Suffolk puffs. Once upon a time, many years ago, people used to make quilts out of these, make whole quilts out of these little Suffolk puffs, and I've noticed that there's been a few made lately. You see them on social media sometimes. So once you've secured that off nice and tightly, then we can cut our thread, and then what we're going to do is that will sit on the top of that like that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do, we're just going to put the Suffolk puff aside for the minute. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take all the papers out of our work now. So you will press that nice and flat, and then we can take all of the papers out of our work. And just peel it back on the edge, get your finger underneath, pull it out like a band-aid, like that. Just quickly pull them out. Okay, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how to pop that onto your background fabric and then pop your Suffolk puff on the top. So once you've removed all of your papers, we have a nice little Dresden. We're going to take our background for these. So these are cut at 9 inches, and then we'll trim them back to 8.5 when we're done. You need to fold them in half, these backgrounds, and fold in half again so they're quartered. So we have a central line through the middle both ways, so we can find the centers. I'm going to take our Daley glue, which is an applique glue. These are great new bottles that we've got here, really soft to squeeze, and a nice pointy tip on them. So we're just going to be using a really small amount of glue, just nothing more than that. So I just pop it on each one, just a really small dot going around. and then I'll put a couple of dots in the middle just to secure it, and that's all we need. And then I'll just line it up with my fold lines so I can make sure that the little Dresden is in the middle. And at this point I would probably pop the iron on that just so that it will adhere to the background immediately, because I generally don't have any time to wait for glue to dry. It will dry on its own, but sometimes I need to give it a bit of a helping hand with the iron. So I would press that and make sure that was on there, so when I'm carrying my work around with me, that's not going to come off. So the next thing you'll do once you've done that, you would applique around the outside edge. So for right-handed people, I would sew from right to left across the top of my work. So that would mean I would be starting here and sewing this way. If you're left-handed, you would sew in the opposite direction. Okay, once you've sewn that down with your little applique stitch, you're going to take your Suffolk puff and you can pop a little bit of glue in behind there if you want to, just to hold him in place, and you can center him up there, and then you're just going to run another applique stitch around the outside edge there just to secure him to that little Dresden plate block. Okay, then you just give it a press, and then I would trim this block back to 8.5 inches. So there you have it with our little Dresden block, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to work the outside border, how we put those together with the little thimbles and squares, and how they make a neat little scalloped border. Okay, so I'm going to jump right out to the last border, and the last border is just on your back, is pieced up as you can see here, and then it's appliqued onto your background fabric. So this last border is made up of a shape called rounded thimbles, which are these here, and then some 1-inch squares. So these little thimbles are just rounded thimbles, and they work beautifully in with this 1-inch square. If you were to join these up in a circle, there would be 18 and they would form a proper circle. But if we take, because there's 16 of them in the circle, and we just take 4 out, we get a nice scalloped edge happening here. So I'm just going to show you how I cut and glue those curved edges. So take some fabric and pop it onto your board. Pop your template, again it's got the 1/4-inch seam allowance on it, so we're just going to pop it onto the rotating mat and just cut around the outside edge. So it's quite easy to cut around a curved edge, particularly when you've got a rotating mat, because you can turn it as you go. Okay, and there we have a couple of those cut already. So we've got those, and then we'll take some papers, which I have over here. Now all of these papers and templates come in the pattern, so once you've got the pattern, you don't have to run around looking for papers and templates to go with it. They all come in the pack. So again, you're going to put your paper into the middle of your fabric, working down one side and keeping it in from the edge slightly. So we're going to fold that first edge over. Now when you're doing these curved edges, gluing is perfect for this, because you can get your glue around the curve, put a tiny little bit on that fabric there, and as you work around, go from one side to the other and drag it in. Be a little bit assertive with it, drag it down over that curved edge. All right, and then we're going to come down the side, and this one we're actually going to glue across the bottom. Okay, so when I turn this over, if you look at that curved edge there, see how smooth it is there, and you'll see that all our little pleats are sitting down nice and low across here. So because when we're gluing it, we're dragging it in, it pulls all those little pleats that you would normally get around that curved edge, it pulls them away from the curved edge, so it's nice and smooth for you. So I'll just do that one more time for you. So again, we're just going along one side, keep it in from the edge a little bit. As you're coming around this curved edge, again, keep it away from the edge slightly, a little bit on the fabric just there, and drag it in. Work from one side to the other. Don't start in the middle and come back. Don't pick it up in your fingers. Keep it down on your board. Don't be tempted to pick it up and do this with it. Keep it down and drag it in nice and tight over that curved edge, down the side, and then just across the bottom there. So there we have it. One more time. So again, you can see how smooth that is across the top there, and there's no pleats. No points on that top curve. Okay, so then we would be going to sew these together. So you would be putting these together, and you'd sew from the bottom to the top, or the top to the bottom, and you would sew 4 around. Okay, so what we would have is this. So you would sew 4 of these together and then another 4 together. So you would sew all these little curved thimbles in sets of 4. So 4 and 4, 4 and 4. And then what you're going to do is you're going to cut a square. So you would take your template and we're just going to cut a square. Now if you don't have a square template, you can just use your ruler. We're just cutting a 1.5 inch square for a 1 inch finished square. And then we can take a square paper, again, pop it in the middle of your work, in the middle of your fabric I mean. Take your glue pen and we're just going to go down one side, fold it in, down one side, fold it in, and continue around. Now on your sides you'll have these little bits that stick out a little bit, so you'll get this type of thing happening. Don't worry about that. When we sew it, we'll just pull those little tails back and not sew them into our work. So there you have your little square. So when you've made all these little arcs here, we're going to sew them to the square. So we'll sew this a little square in to meet these up. So you're going to make these little sections like this and then join them and make strips of them. So with your pattern, you will see that we have lots of these little arcs coming around here, and inside the pattern it'll show you how to construct those corner bits. It's still your little arcs and a little square at the top. So you know, it's quite an easy quilt to make. It's a fun quilt to make, and it can be very scrappy. As I said, we've made this in 30s fabrics, but it'll look great in anything. But you could put reproduction with it, you can put brights with it, you can put anything with it, but it looks really fun. The more scrappy it is, the more fun it looks. So I hope you've enjoyed that little overview tutorial today on my Chelsea quilt, and I hope to see you soon. This is Sue Daley from Sue Daley Designs.